I was a nurse for over 22 years in the field of psychiatry.
The supervisor said, "Oh, you're on the ECT rotation next week." And I said, "Oh, well, what do I do?"
The idea is that the shock will subdue the unwanted emotions. In fact, all it ended up with was brain damage.
I underwent electroshock therapy from the ages of 14 to 16.
And I can remember saying, "Why? Why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me?"
If this is a hospital, why are you locking the doors?
This is about making money at the expense of vulnerable people in our society.
One of the most barbaric treatments that the world has ever known.
I don't remember anything anymore. It's too late.
If I ask you, what is ECT or electroconvulsive therapy, what do you say?
I have no idea.
I don't know. I have no clue.
I don't know.
I don't know the acronym, but I'm assuming you're talking about like electroshock therapy.
I think I've seen it in the movies.
It's a pretty bad reputation, and it's generally frowned upon nowadays.
Outdated. I don't think they really use that anymore.
It is considered an antiquated technique.
Barbaric.
Brutal.
Some say it was extremely traumatizing.
Did you know they're still doing electroshock?
I really did not know that this was actually still happening.
Oh, they're still doing it? Why?
I can't believe that it's still allowed.
I thought it was against the law.
Av alla psykiatrins omänskliga metoder är en av de mest grymma och barbariska elektrokonvulsiv terapi.
People often ask, what is electroshock? And what it is electrocution. That's all it is. They don't call it electrocution. They call it electroconvulsive therapy because it has a magic three-letter acronym, ECT. And the one thing it isn't is therapy.
ECT involves applying electrodes to a patient's scalp and then passing an electrical current through the skull and the brain tissue in order to induce a seizure.
Psykiatriker skickar upp till 460 volt med rå elektricitet genom skallen för att avsiktligt framkalla ett krampanfall som kan vara i upp till en halvtimme.
It is ultimately imparting large amounts of electricity. Many times the voltage you would get even if you stuck your finger into a light socket.
Faktum är att ECT utförs med samma spänning som går åt till att driva 2 hissar, driva en containerkran eller tända 5 arenaljus.
This is an electroconvulsive therapy machine, also called a shock machine. The purpose of this instrument is to run an electric current through the head of a patient. These are the 2 electrodes. The machine applies a voltage to these 2 electrodes, and that causes a current to flow through the patient's brain, and that constitutes the treatment. So if we set this dial to 100%, then this instrument is set to pass 3 billion electrons through the patient's head during one treatment.
ECT-apparater genererar nästan 430 gånger strömstyrkan hos en chockpistol. Apparaterna i sig är ganska enkla. De drar in elektricitet i en kondensator, en energilagrande anordning som gör att apparaten kan hålla över dubbelt så mycket som kommer ur ett vägguttag. Med en knapptryckning skickar psykiatriker detta enorma lass högspänningselektricitet direkt genom skallen. Men hjärnan är ett mycket känsligt instrument som består av cirka 100 miljarder neuroner. Den tolkar och vidarebefordrar ett oräkneligt antal signaler som är nödvändiga för kontroll av kroppen. Mer än 5 biljoner signaler varje sekund. Hjärnan drivs av mindre än 0,2 volt elektricitet. Det är nästan 8 gånger mindre än ett klockbatteri. Jämför det med den potentiella spänning som skickas genom hjärnan under en enda chockbehandling. 2300 gånger den elektricitet hjärnan använder för att fungera. Det är lika kraftfullt som ett slag i ansiktet av en proffsboxare.
And the outcome of that is it destroys brain cells. And the more brain cells you destroy, in theory, the better it is for the person. The biggest mystery of all is why on earth people think that putting bolts of electricity through people's heads is a good idea.
Psykiatriker chockar patienter för att skapa vad de kallar ett terapeutiskt krampanfall. Men det finns inget sånt.
When we're in emergency departments and someone comes in with a seizure, that is a bona fide emergency. And we hop right to and try to stop the seizure immediately and its side effects and the things that it causes.
Ett krampanfall är en plötslig elektrisk urladdning i hjärnan som orsakar förändringar i beteende, sensation eller medvetande. Krampanfall kan vara resultatet av ett medicinskt tillstånd såsom epilepsi eller orsakas av yttre krafter.
There are seizures that are fever-induced, or if it's alcohol withdrawn, or if it is caused by hallucinogens or by cocaine or methamphetamine. Those things, when the patient stops using them, they improve.
Men med ECT framkallar psykiatriker krampanfall av värsta slag. Dessa kallas grand mal-anfall och de orsakas av abnorm elektrisk aktivitet genom hela hjärnan.
Okay, grand mal seizure is when you go unconscious and have a lot of spasmodic muscular contractions which can hurt you, and you can often lose control of your bladder and bowels.
They could stop breathing, they could bite their tongue, arch their back to such an extent as to cause a fracture of the spine. It's just a complete disorganization of neurologic function where a person has no control over their body.
The more seizures a person has, the more potential there is for cognitive decline, different neurologic dysfunctions, and more seizures.
Having recurrent seizures potentially reduces the lifespan of that individual. It has an impact on mortality.
Varje år dör 45 000 amerikaner av krampanfall. Lika många som dör i trafikolyckor.
You know, mainstream physicians go to great lengths to prevent seizures. Epilepsy, seizure disorder, is a medical problem that we give medication for in order to prevent any seizures, not just some seizures. The idea is to prevent seizures, to prevent brain damage, because it's recognized that seizure activity promotes brain damage.
Ändå är detta vad chockläkare hävdar vara terapeutiskt. Och därför framkallar de grand mal-anfall med flit.
I became part of the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, which is an international watchdog investigating psychiatric abuses, because I've had shock treatment. I know the damage that it caused. I know what damage it did, not just to me, but to my family who had to get me through that. You know, when I was very young, I felt depressed, but what I didn't know is that I actually had an underactive thyroid. I was sent to a psychiatrist by my GP, and he said, well, you need shock treatment. The shock is like a grenade going off in the body. The violence of this, it's like every nerve and every cell is being electrified and with such force. And you come out of it and you know that that body is never going to be the same again. When I woke up, I was so disjointed. I didn't know where I was. I was in an incredible amount of pain. And I looked at this person standing next to my bed, and I didn't know who it was. I said, well, who are you? And she said, I'm your mother. Electroshock is torture being passed off as therapy. It is a betrayal.
Hur kommer psykiatriker undan med denna barbariska behandling? Deras historia är översållad med dem. På 1920-talet hävdade psykiatrikern Manfred Sakel att han framgångsrikt kunde behandla psykiskt sjuka patienter genom att döda dåliga hjärnceller. I verkligheten framkallade han hjärnskadande krampanfall genom att använda insulin som dödade 5% av alla patienter och gjorde andra till dårar. Den ungerska neuropsykiatrikern Ladislas Meduna hävdade att han kunde driva ut psykisk sjukdom genom att framkalla hjärnskadande krampanfall med en kraftfull drog kallad metrazol. Men även det misslyckades.
Since its inception, psychiatry has really had 4 modalities of treatment that they recircle over and over again. Cut it, burn it, drug it, shock it to the human mind. So when one of their treatments fails, they use it to promote the next one.
I kölvattnet på skadan som orsakades av metrazol hoppade psykiatriker till prefrontal lobotomi som deras senaste mirakelkur. Genom att använda isklyvare för att strimla sina patienters hjärnor skapade psykiatriker tiotusentals mänskliga kollin. Tills våldsam opposition tvingade dem att överge denna monstruösa procedur. Under tiden hade de redan vänt sig till ett nytt framsteg: elektricitet.
Hugo Cerletti wrote in his own documents that he was inspired to develop electroshock by his observation of pigs being led to slaughter. And he saw that the effect of shock on these pigs was to make them more docile and controllable, and it made them not even fight for their own survival.
Under de kommande 2 åren utförde Cerletti experiment med elchocker på en mängd olika djur.
Cerletti progressed to taking homeless people off the street and subjecting them to electric shock.
Enligt Cerletti själv tiggde hans första mänskliga offer, en hemlös man, om att inte chockas igen. Cerlettis kollega, psykiatrikern Lothar Kalinowski, bevittnade fasorna med den första proceduren, som hans fru mindes det.
He came home for lunch, as white as a sheet, and said, "Today I saw something terrible." And he described the first electric shock treatment, and he ended with, "I never want to see this again."
Trots de uppenbara skador psykiatriker orsakade med elchocker spred de snart den lukrativa proceduren genom Europa och Förenta Staterna. Vid 1940-talet användes elchocker i stor omfattning och i dess grövsta form.
The original idea was that you would invoke a convulsion. And of course, by definition, if you're having a convulsion, your body is jerking. The problem was that people's bodies were jerking so much, they were breaking their shoulders, they were breaking their necks, bones were being broken.
Men det hindrade inte psykiatriker från att marknadsföra denna brutala procedur till allmänheten.
Many patients have been returned to their homes and jobs who might still be here if it were not for this helpful form of treatment.
ECT has been around since I was a medical student, and I graduated from medical school 60 years ago this year. I considered it as a medical student, having observed a few of them. I guess the kindest thing I could say is barbarian. I thought it was truly one of the most obnoxious things I'd ever seen done to a human being. A huge percentage of these people have brain damage.
Vid 1950-talet hade hjärnskadorna som elchocker orsakade blivit för mycket att ignorera. Så psykiatriker vinklade det till sin fördel.
Experts like Walter Freeman would say that the reason that ECT works is because it causes brain damage.
Maybe it will be shown that a mentally ill patient can think more clearly and more constructively with less brain in actual operation.
Och det var det uttalade målet, mindre hjärna.
In the 1940s and the 1950s, it was very open in the medical literature that the way electroshock, quote, worked was by brain damage. And yet they went on to say that this was somehow going to end up being beneficial for the patient, when all it really ended up with was brain damage. Den
marknadsföringsvinkeln ändrades abrupt 1975. när filmen Gökboet avslöjade brutaliteten.
The movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest forever changed the course of the public's perception of electroshock therapy because it was so accurately portrayed in the film. It was so obviously torture.
När elchocker nu äntligen granskades av allmänheten började nyhetsorganisationer dokumentera antalet dödsfall.
Just like it's true that you can chemically control someone, yes, you can electrically shock someone out of their so-called crazy mind, but you don't shock them back into their right mind. You shock them into a shocked mind.
Till och med elchockens erkända farfar i USA medgav skadorna.
The principal complications of ECT are death, brain damage, memory impairment, and spontaneous seizures.
Gonna do another one, Paul? I think so. These are short seizures.
Inför allmän protest hittade psykiatriker på en ny mirakelkur. Psykofarmaka. Men även dessa preparat visade sig vara ineffektiva och farliga och var liktydiga med en kemisk lobotomi. Psykiatriker hade ett svar: att återvinna och ompaketera elchocker.
Electroshock was so abhorrent to the American public that psychiatry came up with a PR campaign to change its name to electroconvulsive therapy. But it is not therapy. It has never been therapy.
För att dölja skadan la chockläkare till bedövning och muskelavslappnande medel för att undertrycka hur patienterna vred sig i konvulsioner. De marknadsförde ECT som modern och de gör det än idag.
Well, electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT today, is nothing like what you've seen in the movies. It's a modern medical procedure.
Modern ECT is a lot better than old-fashioned ECT.
It doesn't look at all barbaric now.
Men bakom försäljningspratet är elchock precis lika brutalt som det alltid har varit. Och resultaten förblir de samma. Ett granmallanfall och hjärnskador. Det enda som har förändrats är marknadsföringen.
I was a psychiatric nurse for 22 years, and I worked at a facility that did ECTs on adults. I became a whistleblower because I saw things that were being done to patients that were wrong, were unlawful, unethical. We used to tell our patients who would go in for ECT, things are not the same as they used to be back in the 1950s. And at the consultation, we would give out these videos called Shock. And our overall pitch to patients was, we don't know how it works. We just know that it does. We would compare it to rebooting a computer. The patients were led to believe this was somehow or another a miracle. And it wasn't a miracle. I didn't see any miracles, and I was in the business.
Ett område där ECT-apparater alltid har orsakat hjärnskador.
Here we have two electroconvulsive therapy machines. This one is from the 1940s, and this one is a much more modern machine from the 2000s. They both have the same potential to do damage to the brain by running large amounts of electricity through the brain cells with the risk that cells will be damaged or killed.
Ändå visar ECT-promotion-videor psykiatriker som säljer in raka motsatsen.
ECT is the gold standard treatment for that type of depression. It's a small amount of current. It's nothing like what's in the outlet at home, okay?
Det här är en typisk och vida spridd lögn. Till skillnad från ECT-apparater är vägguttag inte avsedda att chocka folk. I Förenta Staterna har de säkerhetsproppar som stänger av strömmen vid 6000 ampere. En enhet som mäter styrkan i elektrisk ström. Moderna ECT-apparater levererar dock mellan 800 till 900 tusendels ampere. Upp till 150 gånger den lagliga gränsen satt för att skydda mot dödliga stötar. Och det är vad som skickas genom huvudet på ECT-patienter.
I was only 24 years old, and I didn't have anything except what you call the baby blues. My hormones were completely messed up after having a child. My husband was told that the best way to handle this was take me to a psychiatrist. And the next thing I know, they have me in a hospital, and they shocked me. And you would just wake up not knowing where you are or how you got there. And they would send me back, and they would just continue to do this over and over and over and over again. You just got shocked whether you wanted to be shocked or not. They just have to keep hitting your head with that hammer. They gave me 28 shock treatments. They took my soul, my mind, my intellect, my emotions. They put electricity to it. They ran it through my head and literally raped my soul.
ECTs moderna ompaketering medför fler faror än bara elektriciteten.
The drug they use as a relaxant in the US before you receive electroshock is also the drug they use for lethal injections.
Denna drog kallas suxameton. Den paralyserar alla muskler i kroppen förutom hjärtat. På grund av dess effektivitet med att stoppa andningen är det en drog som regelbundet används för att avrätta dödsdömda fångar. Psykiatriker använder den för elektrokonvulsiv terapi.
The same drug that's used to kill the person in the execution by paralyzing his breathing also paralyzes his breathing during the shock treatment, which is why the anesthesiologist actually has to ventilate the patient during the procedure. Same drug, same effect.
Modern electroshock is being given under sterile conditions in a regular operating room, looking very much like a regular medical operation, and it's all much more acceptable to anybody who would observe it. In fact, the literature shows that electroshock given under general anesthesia may even be more brain damaging than electroshock as it was given before.
Anledningen? Narkosen och det muskelavslappnande medlet höjer faktiskt krampanfallströskeln, vilket gör att mer intensiv elektricitet krävs för att framkalla ett krampanfall. Och ju mer ECT-behandlingar en patient får, desto högre blir patientens tröskel. Så psykiatriker vrider upp elektriciteten ännu mer varje gång. Detta orsakar hjärnskador, vare sig patienten har fått lugnande medel eller inte.
When you give a shock treatment and you give the anesthesia, it does nothing to protect their brain. So you can only protect their body while you're destroying their mind.
It's like this. If you are awake and get hit with a baseball bat, it's obvious that we would feel a lot of pain. But if you're unconscious and get hit with a baseball bat, your body goes through that same trauma. So why are we acting as if in our society that the body doesn't go through trauma just because somebody's conscious or not conscious?
Tidiga chockläkare använde 80 volt, vilket är väldigt lite jämfört med det dagens ECT-apparater åstadkommer. Faktum är att en apparattillverkare rekommenderar att psykiatriker ökar eldosen upp till 6 gånger mer än vad som behövs för att framkalla krampanfall.
We have here a Spectrum 4000 ECT machine, which is a modern device. It's connected to 2 resistors here, which is typical of the resistance that a patient's head would present to an ECT machine. I'm going to hit the treat button, and we'll be able to see if there's any temperature rise using the heat gun. I'll press the treat button. 112, 118, 120. So, we see that the current that the ECT machine forced through these resistors caused them to heat up from approximately 75 degrees to 120 degrees. The cells can get too hot, they can be damaged, or even die.
If you look at the MRI of their brain, they have areas that have disappeared. They're wasting away, just like somebody with Alzheimer's.
Det är resultatet av att få i sig upp till 450 gånger strömmen i en kofrösare. Men för många är skadan långt mer än fysisk.
Every time I look in the mirror, I try to wonder who I am. Just try to kind of put the pieces together of who I used to be. I started an antidepressant, and then it was just multiple cocktails of drugs, of antipsychotics, antidepressants, anti-anxiety pills, sleeping medication, stimulants. And I just deemed treatment resistant. And then at 21, I was given electroshock. I went through a neurocognitive testing 6 months after, and I lost approximately about 50 points of IQ. My IQ is measured at 78, which I think that 75 is rendered mentally retarded. It's a constant identity crisis that I deal with. I do consider shock treatment torture because it damaged me physically and mentally in every way, and it's just continue. It's like every day I'm reliving the shock because I don't know who I am. They say that it's safe and effective, but I think I'm living proof that it's not.
Psykiatriker kan varken hävda att ECT är säker eller effektiv, eftersom deras kunskap om dess grunder lyser med sin frånvaro.
Electrical engineers understand how electricity works, and biomedical engineers understand the effects that electric currents can have on human tissue. Psychiatrists, however, typically don't receive the kind of training to make them understand electricity, what it is, what it does, what it can do to the human body. So we have in this case an operator who is merely trained to set the knobs and push the buttons without understanding the ramifications of what he's doing.
En chockläkare som förhördes i domstol angående sin utbildning i elektricitet bevisade poängen.
What is an amp?
What is an amp? It's been a long time since high school physics, and I couldn't give you a scientific definition of what an amperage is.
Do you have a definition of a volt?
A volt. A volt might be the power at which an amperage is pushed through an electrical wire.
You're not quite sure what these terms mean, are you?
I'm not quite sure.
One of the settings that you put on your dials on your machine is hertz, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you know what the term hertz actually means?
I don't.
Do you tell your patients about your level of understanding of the resistance of the brain to the electricity you're sending through it?
No.
Do you think they might want to know before they lay their head down on the operating table to have you give them shock treatment?
No one's ever asked.
Innan Dr. Joseph Johnson gav sitt vittnesmål hade han gett över 1800 elchocksbehandlingar. Men Dr. Johnson är inte ensam om att vara bedrövligt okunnig om de grundläggande principerna och termerna inom elektricitet. Kursplanerna i psykiatriska skolor tar med väldigt lite om ämnet. Och psykiatriker medger att de inte vet ett dugg om hur deras så kallade behandling fungerar.
Electroshock is as much art as science because how it works is still a mystery.
Do you know how it works, Jonathan?
I don't think anybody really knows how it works.
There's no specific answer to that question.
People don't understand
why this works or how it works.
How does it work? Well, as a field, we are focusing on researching that question. We don't
really know is what you're saying.
We don't have the complete answers. However, it's not a complete cure.
Hur psykiatriker kommer undan med det är ytterligare ett mysterium.
A cardiologist, orthopedic surgeons, other physicians in other specialties really just couldn't get away with using tools of their trades with knowing so little about it as shock doctors do about what they're doing.
Och ändå kommer faktiskt psykiatriker undan med det varje gång de utför denna procedur.
Psychiatrists will tell you that they don't know exactly how ECT works. But what they do know is that it causes brain damage, organ failure, it can kill someone, it can cause seizures. They do know that much. But they can't tell us how it actually works.
Chockpsykiatrikern Richard Abrams, delägare i ECT-apparattillverkaren Somatics, har erkänt sin egen okunnighet under ed.
Do you have any understanding as to the mechanics of how ECT works?
I do not.
All right. Would you agree that that's the general state of the industry still today? That the practitioners of ECT don't have an understanding of how it works?
That's correct.
Samma Richard Abrams skrev standardläroboken om ECT. Samma psykiatriker som medger att han inte vet någonting om hur ECT fungerar skrev en lärobok som verkar vara vetenskaplig och auktoritativ medan han tillverkar ECT-apparater och säljer dem över hela världen. Samtidigt använder utövarna av ECT dessa apparater för att drämma till sina offer med mer spänning än hos en industriell tryckpress.
They see that as their job. Give the patient the drugs and they push the red button and zap him. But they don't study the underlying science because there isn't any.
My personal experience as a psychiatry resident was I was doing a rotation. All of a sudden my supervisor says, "Oh, you're on the rotation for ECT next week." And I said, "Oh, well, what do I do?" I've had no training, no instruction whatsoever. I arrive at the room, I walk in, there's the anesthetist, there's the nurse, there's the equipment, the patient's wheeled in, and now I have to set the settings on the machine. So I look at the log and I say, oh, well, the last time this person had a treatment, the settings were this and this. So I adjust the dials, person gets treated. Next patient who comes in, it's their first course of ECT. The very first treatment. So there's nothing in the logbook. So then I go, I guess I'll just do halfway in between the last two patients. Set the dials, off we go. That's literally the experience I had. No supervision, no follow-up, nothing.
Till och med chockläkare som varit verksamma länge vet inte hur mycket elektricitet som kommer att framkalla ett krampanfall hos en ny patient. Det är bara att pröva sig fram. Ta till exempel Charles Kellner, en framstående ECT-psykiatriker som visade detta i nationell TV.
Preparing the sites for the electrodes for the delivery of the stimulus. Okay, treated. Anything else? No. Okay. Still didn't get it? Got it. Okay. Now she's having a seizure. Yeah.
Half an hour after her seizure, Terry is in recovery.
Your treatment went really well. I want you to know that, okay?
The very next day, Terry is back.
Do you recognize me? No, I'm Dr. Kellner.
Att tillfoga en patient 3 hjärnskadande chocker i rad är inte bara misshandel. ECT vållar svåra skador hos alla som utsätts för det. Som en av elchockens mest fanatiska anhängare, psykologen Harold Sackheim, sa under ed.
Altered cognition is the most common side effect of ECT. That memory loss occurs, it's universal, and in some individuals it can be profound.
Ändrad kognition är ingen småsak. Det innebär en grundläggande försämring hos de högsta centra för hjärnfunktion som kontrollerar emotionellt medvetande, självinsikt, omdöme och minne. Och minnesförlust är det första ECT-offer märker av.
It wasn't until I was at Shoal Creek that I saw a psychiatrist. And little did I know, after I signed myself in freely, that I couldn't leave for 72 hours. I wouldn't leave my room. I couldn't be around other people. I was terrified, and every time I went for another treatment of ECT, I got more and more paranoid. My head was exploding for days. I couldn't do anything but fall on the bed and sleep for 16 hours or something. I'd have to write everything down and then remember where I wrote it. My family would tell me, look at your book. Look at your book. I had to carry this book around with me all the time. My first service dog I got because if I left the apartment to go check the mail, I would get lost. I couldn't remember the number of the apartment. I'd just wander around. When I applied for disability, I had to go to the office and take some kind of test. I couldn't tell them my name. I couldn't tell them where I lived. I couldn't tell them how to get to my house. I couldn't tell them the president. I couldn't tell them anything. And my older sister told me that they asked her, is she like this all the time? And she said, pretty much.
I spent 30 years working in the psychiatric system, principally as a clinical psychologist. And during that time, I saw numerous patients who'd received electroshock. I spoke with numerous psychiatrists who delivered electroshock. And it was really after that I became kind of intrigued as to what was going on and why were these people delivering it. And more to the point, why did so many of my patients have long-term memory problems? There's a thing called anterograde amnesia, which is you lose your memory for everything after the shock, so you don't create new memories. And then there's retrograde amnesia, which is you lose memories for things immediately before the shock.
There's only been a few studies done in the last 33 years on permanent amnesia over the long term, 6 months or greater. And what they found, when they look for it, they find it. But they tend just not to look for it.
They knew about permanent memory loss a long time ago, and they actually instructed the field to say that it wasn't permanent, that it wasn't long-term, to use words such as transient, words such as spotty, words such as temporary, to minimize these adverse events.
Men utanför sina kliniker erkänner psykiatriker ogenerat att minnesförlust är ett framträdande drag hos ECT.
Clearly there are risks with ECT. That's been well established for a long time. Some people have regretted doing it because of memory impairment.
Memory loss occurs when patients get electroconvulsive therapy.
The amnesia problem with memory.
They have some memory problems that persist more than we'd like.
While someone's going through ECT, they have pretty profound memory loss.
Sometimes, they can impact the patient pretty severely.
It's like a little volcano inside the brain.
You get more bang for your buck with ECT. If you pardon the pun, you know.
Men chockpsykiatriker gör sällan lika uppriktiga bekännelser inför sina patienter.
The industry has variously represented that ECT's benefits exceed its disadvantages. They don't deny that there are disadvantages to ECT, they minimize them. It's a sales pitch.
Och det säljs in av PR-firmor som ger samtalspunkter till medieutbildade psykiatriker.
ECT is the fastest and most effective treatment that we have.
It's the most effective treatment that we have today for severe depression.
The single most effective treatment we have for depression.
It is the most effective
really
treatment.
Effective for depression. It's
ECT
more effective
is more
than
effective than antidepressant more therapy. effective than many of the psychotropic
ECT
medications.
remains number one.
More than medication, more than therapy, more than ketamine.
One of the most effective treatments for anything in medicine.
Men det de rabblar upp är en vinkling, inte vetenskap.
Shock psychiatrists blame all kinds of adverse effects of ECT on the patient or their underlying mental condition. For example, memory loss or inability to make executive decisions are blamed on the person's underlying depression when it's actually an effect of the ECT.
Utöver att tillfoga skador i skallen kan ECT orsaka skador i hela kroppen.
That's why when you get ECT, there's a crash cart there in case the heart goes into an abnormal rhythm. And if that happens, the doctors have that there in order to bring the person back to life.
Trots fall efter fall av dokumenterade skador som orsakats av ECT avfärdar psykiatriker dessa rapporter som anekdotiska. De struntar också i sina egna undersökningar som visar att det inte finns något värde med ECT.
Sham ECT is basically placebo control, where the person's wheeled into the room, they're put to sleep, electrodes are put on their head, buttons pushed, but there's no electricity. And so the patient doesn't know if they got real or sham. There's only 12 or 13 of those kind of studies ever. And when you pool them together, there is absolutely no evidence anywhere that people who've had ECT are better off 1 month later.
Men de som utsätter sig för verklig ECT fastnar ofta i chockindustrins ekorrhjul.
Just like with psychiatric drugs and in the psych hospital, they keep coming back. We used to call them frequent flyers. They would be readmitted. We see the same patients coming in and out.
Men psykiatriker som Sarah Lisenby skyller på att patienten fått återfall istället för att behandlingen misslyckades.
Without a maintenance treatment, you can have rapid relapse, but with maintenance treatment, you can have sustained relapse prevention.
Can I ask you, Dr. Lisenby, what you think the minimum length of time is that is required to demonstrate an effect of the device?
Well, I guess I'm saying that I guess I'm trying to answer by analogy. ECT is an effective intervention without any form of relapse prevention. Patients will relapse very quickly.
Fakta om vad psykiatriker kallar för återfall är följande. Hjärntraumat som orsakas av ECT är betydande. Det motsvarar kraften av att släppa ett 18 kilos betongblock från 2,3 meters höjd på huvudet. För att bota denna katastrofala skada frisätter hjärnan kemikalier, vilket orsakar ett lyckorus. Men detta avtar snabbt och personens problem återvänder. Ofta mycket värre. Och när det händer ordinerar psykiatriker mer ECT. De kallar det underhålls-, fortsättnings- eller booster-ECT.
The nature of depression is that it is usually a relapsing illness.
Regular recurring ECT treatments may be needed.
Many people often go on to get what's called maintenance.
Ongoing maintenance therapy is provided.
And then you need another 10 ECT.
This is going to be a repeated pattern of these people are going to be on courses of treatment that will last for the rest of their lives.
And, you know, the average today is about 35 treatments of shock every year. And of course it doesn't work, it just makes them worse and it damages.
Psykiatrikerna och ECT-apparattillverkarna Richard Abrams och Conrad Swartz erkände denna brist på resultat i ett brev till FDA. Det är inte förvånande att utvärderingar utförda flera veckor eller månader efter fullbordandet av akutkuren med ECT-behandling vanligtvis inte påvisar en betydande fördel med ECT. ECT orsakar inte bara hjärnskador och förstör kroppsfunktion. Den kan också vara dödlig.
It can make people suicidal, either just contemplating suicide or actually going out and taking their lives.
The man who left an indelible impression on English literature is dead. Ernest Hemingway died of a self-inflicted wound at his Ketchum, Idaho home.
Nobelpristagaren i litteratur Ernest Hemingway begick självmord kort efter att ha fått en serie elchocker. Innan sin bortgång skrev han: "Vad är det för mening med att förstöra mitt huvud och utplåna mitt minne som är mitt kapital och förstöra min förmåga att arbeta?" Det var en fantastisk kur, men vi förlorade patienten.
And we know that by doing ECT, the suicide rate, you're 13 times more likely to commit suicide if you do the ECT than if you had never done it.
I was bullied at school, being abused at home. So then, the doctor tells me, well, we want to try a new treatment with you. She's like, we call it ECT. I was 17 years old when I received ECT for the first time. Here I am, I'm a scrawny 110-pound kid, and you got these guys that are like ex-military UFC-looking fighters just grab me, throw me in a room, and stab me with an injection, putting leather restraints on my arms. Then all I remember is waking up in my room. My head felt like it was on fire. It was like the worst headache I've ever had. And then I started panicking because I didn't know who I was. But I don't remember my name. I don't remember anything. I don't remember what happened the day before. It was, I didn't remember anything at all. When I came back, I wasn't used to my home, my neighborhood, nothing. And the next 4 years I blank. And it got to the point where I got fed up with it. So I took like half of my Prozac and I just, put it in my mouth, put myself like a self-induced coma. I remember I was just in my bed all day cutting myself, trying drowning myself, hanging myself, thinking of ways I could end my life. Putting a plastic bag around my head, tying it, going under my blankets, just wait to die already. Even to this day, I'm still suicidal. I mean, if you don't care about your memories or your life or anything like that, oh yeah, go ahead, do it. If you love pain, you love headaches and all that, yeah, go do it. If you want to remember your life, you want to remember your friends and all the good times, yeah, don't do it.
One of the dangers of ECT is death. That's known. It's actually reported in MedWatch reports in the FDA. You had a death that occurred to a patient just hours after they received ECT. So, does ECT cause death? Yes, it does.
Researchers at Brown University looked at the effect of ECT in the elderly. They looked at depressed elderly patients who were given ECT and compared them to depressed elderly patients who got usual medical treatment. And they found that the death rate after just 1 year among the ECT recipients was 27%, compared to an over 96% survival rate among the people who were treated without electric shock.
Med andra ord, pensionärer som fick ECT hade ett 6 gånger högre dödstal än de som inte fick det.
So one of the demonstrations I like to do with ECT is show the difference in the amount of electricity based on the age. So if a person is 20 years old and you do the electric shock, this is how long it is. If a person is 70 years old, this is the length. So the longer the electric shock is based on how old you are.
So 2/3 of the recipients of electroshock are women. Something like 3/4 of them are over the age of 60. I think the oldest person to receive electroshock was 104.
En för tidig död är inte begränsad till de äldre. En omfattande studie av över 3000 ECT-patienter fann att ECT-mottagare i alla åldrar hade ett ökat dödstal oavsett orsak. Till och med amerikanska psykiatrikerförbundet rapporterar att ECT dödar. Men de hävdar att det bara är 1 på 10 000 patienter. En gissning som gjordes av Richard Abrams, psykiatrikern som tillverkar och säljer ECT-apparater. Den riktiga siffran? Delstaten Texas rapporterar att 1 på 350 dog inom 2 veckor efter att ha fått ECT. Det är 50 gånger högre än USAs mordfrekvens. och 30 gånger högre än vad APA hävdar. Till och med när patienter vägrar ECT är de på de flesta platser i världen ändå inte säkra.
So if a person determines, I don't want ECT, the psychiatrist can actually go to a judge who can determine that he's not competent to make his own medical decisions and override his own decision about what he wants done to himself and his body and actually deliver him electroconvulsive therapy against his will.
I was assigned to a psychiatrist who was very aggressive in his manner in trying to get me to agree to do ECT. You know, I was skeptical and I said, no, I don't want to do it. The psychiatrist pretty much threatened me. He said that if I don't agree to it, then they can get a court order. My family actually sided with me. They said that they shouldn't do this to me against my wishes. Basically, all the doctors said that I needed to have ECT and that I was not in my right mind to refuse. The probate court judge agreed with them and he issued the court order, and that was how they started the forced ECT on me. I was pretty much tortured. I was being forced to have this treatment. I didn't like it, I didn't want it, and when I was honest with the doctors about how it affected me and I told them, they just interpreted that as part of my depression. I realized that the only way to stop this was to start lying, so that's what I did. What was done to me was really, frankly, evil. It's a barbaric treatment, and that it shouldn't be done to people against their will like it was done to me.
With psychiatry, like most of their treatments, these are frequently given without consent of the patient because it is the only quote-unquote medical field where their authority supersedes your rights, an individual's rights to consent to treatment.
If it breaks their skin like an injection, or if it's a drug that you feed into them one way or another, or if it's electroshock therapy, that is violating a person's sovereignty over his own body. A person has a right to their own body. They have a right not to be violated.
FNs särskilda rapportör om tortyr är mycket bestämd i sitt fördömande av tvångs-ECT.
Against your will, electroshock therapy is, in my opinion, absolutely prohibited. I have seen so many persons who have been subjected to electroshocks in order to extract a confession or information, etc. And it's one of the worst feelings of pain you can imagine if this electric current is really runs through your body. So it's the contractions. It might even lead to death. In my opinion, they are torture.
Och vissa av ECTs tidigaste användningsområden var bokstavligt talat tortyr. Under nazitiden gav tyska psykiatriker dödliga omgångar med ECT till mentalpatienter de ansåg ej var lämpade för livet. Under 1950-talets Algerietrevolt gav psykiatriker elchocker till fångar innan de förhördes. CIA utbildade den marockanska säkerhetstjänsten i användningen av en elchocksapparat under förhör. Psykiatriker i Sovjetunionen använde elchocker för att bestraffa politiskt oliktänkande som vägrade att hålla sig till partilinjen.
In South Africa, ECT was used as a torturous method of treatment for a group that mental health considered to be animals, because they actually had the idea that if you were black, you couldn't feel pain.
One of the original ECT devices, which was actually manufactured in the UK, called the Page Russell, was used for torture in Arabic countries and was used on political prisoners. So how do you call something help or treatment when it's been used for torture?
Psykiatriker använder också elchocker för så kallad mind control.
In a moment, we will examine the closest experimentation to brainwashing that we have uncovered.
Den ökända psykiatrikern Ewan Cameron utförde experiment där han försatte människor i en komaliknande djupsömn med droger och elchocker med extremt hög spänning och reducerade dem till ett infantilt tillstånd.
I thought this was the coldest and most impersonal treatment that anybody could give to anybody in the world.
En ivrig förespråkare av Camerons behandling var den australiska psykiatrikern Harry Bailey.
Dr. Harry Bailey studied a treatment called deep sleep therapy, and it involved knocking a person unconscious with a cocktail of psychiatric drugs, usually barbiturates and sedative hypnotics. And while they were in that comatose state, they were given electroshock treatment, sometimes twice daily. The patients were dying. There were 48 deaths. Over 1,100 patients were subjected to this. They all had brain damage. They all had personality changes. They had blood clots. They were seriously damaged by this so-called treatment.
Tonight, why was deep sleep therapy ever allowed to happen at Chelmsford?
The analogy with the appalling medical experimentation by Nazi doctors is difficult to avoid.
Certainly the information that we gave to the Attorney General's Department showed clearly that very often patients were given electric shock treatment without their consent.
The question has remained ever since then, why hasn't the matter been satisfactorily resolved?
CCHR, along with the Chelmsford Victims Action Group, got local media. There were demonstrations on the steps of Parliament demanding a government inquiry into deep sleep treatment. And we worked with legislators and we agitated for reforms, and it actually produced some of the biggest reforms Australia's ever seen.
Good evening. There will be a royal commission into the controversial Chelmsford Hospital deep sleep treatment.
Let me tell you that this royal commission will get to the bottom of all of the abuses that have gone on in the system.
And it was through our investigations, through the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, working with patients and their families who had undergone this deep sleep treatment, we ended up having deep sleep treatment banned.
Idag marknadsför psykiatriker elchocker för nya befolkningsgrupper. Gravida kvinnor får nu höra att ECT är ofarligt för dem och deras ofödda barn.
When a woman is pregnant, she shouldn't drink coffee, she's not supposed to smoke. There's a whole list of things that are bad for the baby when it's in the prenatal stage. However, pregnant women are getting electric shock, causing miscarriages.
It boggles the mind that something like this can be given to a woman who is growing a baby in her body, that of course the electricity is going to affect her and her unborn child.
Barn blir allt oftare en måltavla för ECT-psykiatriker.
It's a horrible idea to give electroconvulsive therapy to children. We don't know what the long-term effects are, but it only makes sense that repeated seizures like that could cause cognitive difficulties, learning difficulties, and damage to the nervous system as it's developing.
You're going to destroy an adult brain, just think what you could do with a child brain. You could do much more damage. Take away his whole future.
Det finns en mycket bra vetenskaplig anledning till att barn aldrig borde få ECT.
In a fully matured brain, there are between 60 and 90 billion nerve cells. And when they die, they are not replaced. But in children, the brain is still developing. So if a cell is killed in an adult, that is one less brain cell the person has to operate with. But if a cell is killed in a child, then not only does he lose that cell, but he loses all the other cells that cell would have created during the development of the brain. So ECT is more dangerous to children even than it is to adults.
Right now in the United States, through Freedom of Information Act, CCHR has uncovered the fact that 16 states are currently electroshocking children and adolescents, and 5 of those states are electroshocking children aged 0 to 5.
Psychiatrists give electroshock to children all over the world. In Australia, children as young as 4 receive electroshock. In Turkey, 9-year-old children receive it explicitly as a punishment.
I'm an ex-law enforcement officer. Much milder things can land people in jail than to send a child through that type of trauma. We have a society where a parent can't even spank a child, but psychiatrists can put 400 volts through the brain of a child.
Under the definition, it's abuse in no other way. You are inflicting harm to a child under the guise of treatment.
Världshälsoorganisationen utfärdade en allvarlig varning om att det finns inga indikationer för användningen av ECT på minderåriga och därav bör detta förbjudas genom lagstiftning. Ändå har både ordföranden och vd:n för amerikanska psykiatrikerförbundet formellt uppmanat chefen för FDA att göra ECT mer allmänt tillgänglig för barn och tonåringar i alla åldrar. Det är en kampanj med föga statlig tillsyn som riktas mot våra mest försvarslösa.
One of the things that the marketing campaign does so brilliantly is to talk about electroshock as a treatment of last resort. That is what we call a lie. There are psychiatrists in the States who recommend electroshock for all sorts of things, including inscriptions like autism, ADHD, learning disability, and they recommend that that is the first treatment that people are given, not the last, not the end of the line.
Idag i Förenta Staterna kräver federala förordningar att alla apparattillverkare ska rapportera negativa ECT-händelser. Men apparattillverkare lyder nästan aldrig detta.
So you have manufacturers that know about adverse events, that have logs of adverse events, that didn't report adverse events to the FDA. And the FDA has done very little to actually enforce those regulations.
Och när de faktiskt rapporterar har det tagit upp till 17 år. Och de som når fram är ofta ohyggliga. Stroke, katatoni, ett foster som dödats, en mans huvud som fattat eld. Och det är bara några få.
My husband Jose Topete had ECT. They told us what a great thing it was and how it was going to help our family and help Jose. Jose had 23 treatments of ECT, and during the ECT treatments, he did not get better at any time. In fact, he had a breakdown at one time after the first week of ECT. We didn't realize that his whole memory was gone until after ECT was over. And one of the just terrible times was we live in a rural area that has a pond, and we have lots of frogs and bullfrogs. Well, we heard the frogs making a lot of racket, and Jose said, "What's that noise?" And we said, "Oh, it's just the frogs." And he said, "What's a frog?" He doesn't know his parents. He doesn't know his siblings. He has no memory of our marriage, the birth of his children, taking care of his family, his job. He was a California state tax auditor. He had no memory of what California tax law was. Everything was wiped out of his mind. His children, me, he didn't know who we were. At first I thought, okay, we'll be able to just teach him who we are and make him love us again. And that didn't work like that. It's been a real heartbreak for all of us.
Trots all skada ECT-apparaten har orsakat har den aldrig blivit ordentligt reglerad.
What we have here is a basic electronic device. It generates pulses for the purpose of delivering an electric shock. There's nothing medical about it, it's just a pulse generator.
Den här ECT-apparaten köptes online. Ingen licens, ingen bakgrundskontroll, inga frågor ställdes. Bara ett kreditkort.
In 1976, the United States Food and Drug Administration was given authority by Congress to regulate devices such as these. This device, of course, was never tested by the FDA because it's too old. This one was used starting in the 1940s. When the FDA gained control over these devices, they didn't start regulating ECT devices because they were already in use. Any device that was already being used did not need to be tested, as long as it's substantially equivalent to the devices that were used when the FDA took control.
The FDA allowed it to be grandfathered in, meaning it didn't require any proof of efficacy or clinical trials for safety and efficacy. They just let it stay on the market.
Så nu skulle psykiatrikerna ha det på två sätt. Å ena sidan påstod de att elchocksapparater var väsentligen likvärdiga med de från 1940-talet. Samtidigt marknadsförde de ECT som modern och ny och förbättrad. Ett uppenbart bedrägeri. Men 1979 klassificerade FDA ECT-apparaten som en klass 3-apparat, vilket betyder att den medför stor risk och måste säkerhetstestas. FDA gav tillverkarna 3 år att försöka bevisa att de är säkra.
So, if ECT wants to claim safety and effectiveness, they should be showing by clinical studies that it's safe and effective. They haven't. And it isn't because they can't afford to. There's plenty of their own consultants that work for big league universities that get plenty of funding to do it. They choose not to because ECT is not effective.
Has Somatics ever conducted any studies to determine whether any brain injury could be caused by ECT?
Somatics has never conducted any studies of any kind. We're not in the business of doing studies of traumatic brain injury. We sell thymotrons.
För att komma runt att någonsin behöva testas har psykiatriker försökt att få FDA att omklassificera apparaterna som klass 2. En kategori som inkluderar sådana saker som sprutor, kontaktlinser och kondomer.
There's nothing else in class 2 that causes brain damage, cardiac standstill, stroke, brain hemorrhage, seizures. It's really ridiculous for them to even be considered as class 2. The reason they want to put the ECT machine in class 2 is because it wouldn't have to be tested for safety or effectiveness.
På grund av allmänna protester beordrade FDA en hearing för att avgöra giltigheten av omklassificering. ECT-överlevande flög till Washington för att vittna.
I argued with a psychiatrist and dumped me in the lockboard and shocked me 5 times. I became violent. I tore my nails off, dragged him under the door. And he said after 5 times, he said, sometimes they don't help you.
I had over 80 shock treatments. And yes, they called them maintenance treatments, but I don't remember my wedding day. I don't remember my husband putting a ring on my finger.
When I was given an IQ test a few months after the ECT and asked the population of the United States, I answered 1,000. When he asked me to guess again, I answered 2,000. I remember having no idea where to find the answer in my head.
Den rådgivande panelen höll för det mesta med om att ECT-apparater borde stanna kvar i klass 3 och att säkerhetstester borde utföras. Men FDA, som representerades av Jeffrey Shuren och hans kollega Malvina Idleman, ignorerade panelens rekommendationer och breddade användningen av ECT-apparater som en klass 2-produkt.
3,000 submissions were sent into the Food and Drug Administration talking about the destructiveness of electroshock. The FDA and the APA and other psychiatrists want to make ECT more broadly available, despite the fact that all these people are saying no, despite tens of thousands of people saying the electroshock is damaging, that it can actually kill you, that it destroys their life.
I recently started ECT treatments, electroconvulsive therapy. I was supposed to have one today, but I went ahead and canceled it. Because I'm stupid now. or I'm definitely not as smart as I used to be. Spent a lot of time and money on education because I wanted to be smart, and I was smart. I don't remember anything anymore. Right now, this is my life. If it's not on this sheet, I'm not remembering it. When it came to ECT, it was out of sheer desperation. And I didn't research it. And I just trusted. And now that I'm where I am, I don't have the brain capacity to research it. It's too late.
Psykiatriker och tillverkare av ECT-apparater är väl medvetna om den skada som de orsakar. Så varför fortsätter de med det?
We look at the cost of manufacturing one of these machines. It has 3 of these transformers. They might be $40 a piece. And these parts probably could be collected for a total of about $50 or $60 for the components. The printed circuit board could probably be manufactured for less than $100 in quantity. All of these resistors are pennies a piece, and the integrated circuits are normally less than $1 a piece. So we see here a device that could be manufactured in quantity for between $500 and $1,000, including parts and labor.
Och med ECT-system som kostar upp till nästan $20,000 är vinsten enorm. Dessutom tjänar psykiatriker ordentligt på att ordinera ECT, eftersom de måste vara närvarande och därför får betalt för alla elchocksbehandlingar.
It costs about $2,500 per session. So if you do the math, and let's just say for simple mathematics, the person has 10 sessions initially, that's $25,000.
Inlagda patienter är ännu mer lönsamma, då man tjänar så mycket som $120,000 per patient.
We would start usually around 6 a.m. We would see up to 13 patients a day. It was almost like an assembly line mentality, kind of get them in, get them worked up, get the treatment, and get them out, get the next one in, get the treatment, do the recovery, get them out. It was a very lucrative business. Big money maker.
Psykiatriker som utför elchocker hovar in i genomsnitt dubbelt så mycket som de som inte gör det. Och de kan tjäna denna inkomst genom att bara arbeta några timmar i veckan.
It's been calculated that in America, psychiatrists doing a relatively small amount of electroshock, possibly 20 sessions a week, will earn anything up to an additional $300,000 per year.
Och med 100 000 amerikaner som varje år får ECT har psykiatriker skapat ett chockimperium som omsätter $5,4 miljarder bara i USA. Mer pengar än nationalbudgeten för över hälften av jordens länder.
It has nothing to do with medicine. It has nothing to do with helping the patients. It's just a money machine.
Med så mycket pengar att tjäna är chockindustrin full av intressekonflikter. Ansiktet för dessa konflikter, psykologen och ivriga ECT-förespråkaren Harold Sackheim.
Has any manufacturer of ECT devices ever given you money?
I've received reimbursements and honoraria.
How much money have you received?
$10,000, maybe $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, $70,000.
Dessutom har Sackheim fått minst $9 miljoner i statliga anslag för att forska i ECT. En intressekonflikt som leder tillbaka till USAs National Institute of Mental Health, NIMH, där dess chef för ECT-forskning, psykiatriker Matthew Rudorfer, handhar dess anslag. Inte bara har Rudorfer i åratal öst pengar över Harold Sackheims institutioner. Duon samförfattade dessutom ett kapitel till en ECT-lärobok. Också vid NIMH finns Sarah Lisenby. Hon har haft ekonomiska kopplingar till 10 olika tillverkare av psykiatriska apparater. Hennes mentor var Harold Sackheim. Sen finns amerikanska psykiatrikerförbundets Richard Weiner. Weiner var chefpsykiatrikern i APAs arbetsgrupp som rekommenderade att ta bort hjärnskador från APAs ECT-samtyckesblankett med dessa ord. Hjärnskador behöver inte inkluderas som en potentiell risk. Weiner var också konsult till de 2 främsta amerikanska ECT-apparattillverkarna, Mecta och Somatics. Somatics ägs av chockpsykiatrikerna Richard Abrams och Conrad Swartz, som tar betalt upp till $20 000 för ett ECT-system. Richard Weiners APA-arbetsgrupps rapport om ECT hänvisade till över 60 av Abrams artiklar. Och alla de främsta aktörerna i denna invecklade väv av korruption är redaktionsledamöter i The Journal of ECT. Abrams, Swartz, Lisenby, Weiner, Sackheim, Rudorfer, Kellner och Fink.
When you invite the foxes to watch the hen house and act like you're really guarding the place, well, it's really just a violation of public trust.
Och människors liv förstörs.
I had problems before I had shock treatments, and I would say I have more problems now.
I didn't receive any help from the ECT that the psychiatrist gave me. It destroys you.
Shock treatment felt like torture to me. I say it's like torture. It felt like it destroyed my spirit.
It beat all the abuse I even experienced. It beat the rapings, the molestations. It beat everything. Because it did so much to me psychologically and physically.
Prior to ECT, I never thought about suicide. After the second round of ECT, I definitely was considering it.
ECT stands for electroconvulsive torture. Because obviously, it didn't help my sister at all.
Psychiatry destroyed my father because it destroyed his purpose, and he committed suicide in the end.
Is it the responsibility of the psychiatrist performing ECT to make sure that no harm comes to his patient?
The answer to that is no.
Under den senaste timmen har psykiatriker gett över 1000 elchocker. Deras offer uppgår till 1 miljon människor världen över varje år. Och med chockläkare som arbetar hårt för att få bort begränsningar för ECT går ingen säker.
It's unconscionable, some of the things that I've seen, particularly as it pertains to very small children.
The way they've treated people is just unbelievable. I couldn't see treating my worst enemy that way.
Oh my God, I don't want that to happen to anybody. It brings tears to my eyes. It's frightening.
Just common sense will tell you that you don't need to put that electricity to their brain. I'm adamantly opposed.
Det finns bara en lösning för ECT. En behandling som är detsamma som en dödlig elstöt.
It's a complete travesty as a civilized society to do these type of torturous, barbaric procedures.
ECT has to be stopped. We cannot continue to do this to people. We have safe and effective treatments that are out there. We do not need ECT.
It's just cruel and inhumane to be able to send people through that type of torture.
We're standing up and saying that this experimental dosing with ECT cannot occur anymore.
It's just assault and battery.
It's more
torture than it is a medical treatment. It should be illegal.
ECT should be banned.
ECT should have been banned 50 years ago. The sooner the better.
Det går att göra. ECT har redan fullständigt eller delvis förbjudits i flera delstater och länder runt om i världen.
We got rid of the lobotomy because it was such an abhorrent image and it was so obviously a form of torture and assault. Electroshock is equally a form of torture and assault. We just haven't gotten rid of it yet. And we need to take action and require the FDA to ban this device, which has never been proven safe or effective.
This is an atrocity that should never have got as far as it has. It's just a mass experimentation, and the FDA does nothing. They need to be held accountable.
ECT måste avslöjas som tortyr och ett barbariskt brott mot de mänskliga rättigheterna. Vår framtid hänger på det. Gå med i kommittén för mänskliga rättigheter och kräv att elchock ses för vad det är, ett brott mot mänskligheten. Om du eller någon du känner har skadats av chockbehandling eller om du vill göra något åt det, ska du agera och tala ut. Kontakta KMR